Welcome back to AP World History. We're talking about the Cold War that takes place after World War II, and we'll be examining the Western societies and the Eastern Europeans and parts of Africa and Asia during this Cold War period. Uh, for a few years after 1945, recovery in Europe seemed impossible. Because of the Marshall Plan that the United States will give aid to Western European powers and they will institute a recovery. The Soviets have control over the Eastern Bloc nations, again talking about Bulgaria, Romania, Yugoslavia, Hungary, East Germany, Poland, Lithuania, and so forth. And the United States is going to be allied to a number of the nations in the West, particularly Great Britain and Italy, France, and helping them to recover after World War II. The relationship between the United States certainly is going to sour during this time because the communists have a goal of spreading communists throughout the world because they believe their system is the best, and the United States, wanting to preserve democracy, becomes their arch rival. And although the United States and the Soviet Union never faced each other face to face, they will conduct surrogate or third party wars where we support one side and the Soviets support the other. Um, the Eastern Bloc nations, again, the Warsaw Pact. In terms of an ideological struggle, the goal is worldwide communism at whatever expense. The nations in the West, particularly the United States, comes up with what they call a containment policy. That is, try to stop the spread of communists. Each side trying to prove to the rest of the world that their system is the best. Both employed espionage. Both will escalate the nuclear arms race. And each side will battle for the hearts and minds of people throughout the world. And then again, these surrogate or proxy wars will be fought in places like Korea and in Vietnam and also Afghanistan and other places. Certainly, bipolarization of Europe will take place. You will have the allies of the United States, which will become known as NATO, and the Warsaw Pact. And many people are afraid that World War III will take place during this time. This gives you sort of a thumbnail sketch of what Europe looked like during 1939. This is the borders are going to look a little bit different after World War II. Something called the Iron Curtain is going to descend across Western Europe, communists being on one side and democracy, the Western powers, being on the other. Again, we talked about the Marshall Plan. It was used to rebuild Europe, Western Europe, offered to the East, but they refused. Germany, again, will be divided into four zones controlled by the U.S., Great Britain, France, and the USSR. This shows the Iron Curtain descending. If you want to look at this red line coming up through border of Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and East Germany, all the way up to the Baltic Sea. This term Iron Curtain was something characterized by Winston Churchill. And it was dividing the East from the West. We talked briefly about the Berlin airlift. This is when the Soviets blocked our route to Berlin, which is divided into East and West Berlin, the West being controlled by France, Great Britain, the United States, East Berlin being controlled by the Soviet Union. Now, Berlin was the capital of Germany prior to World War II. Bonn will eventually become the capital of West Germany. And you can see the zones controlled by the various nations. Eventually, about 1948, 49, in this area, West Germany will become its own nation, and this will be opposed by the Soviet Union. Because of this blockade, there was something called the Berlin Airlift, and it will supply the citizens of West Berlin. Because of this blockade, NATO is going to be formed, and this will be countries in the West pledging security for each other against the Soviet Union and the West Warsaw Pact. Each side, the United States and U.S. and the Soviet Union will stockpile nuclear weapons. The United States had the nuclear weapon first, but by 1949, the Soviets will develop their own atomic bomb. This shows the North Atlantic Treaty Organization founded in 1949, and different countries being admitted at later dates. France and Great Britain and the United States merge the zones, and they will come up with the Federal Republic of Germany, and we talked about that briefly. Western Europe saw a movement towards welfare states, socialist countries providing health care and assistance. Each will establish their own, for instance, Italy will establish their own constitutional democracy. Nations in NATO are considered democratic countries. You can see here the blue representing democracies and the red representing dictatorships, communist. The resurgence of Western Europe. By the 1950s, the Europeans have gotten pretty much back on their feet. They will see labor shortages, and they'll see an influx of immigrants from Africa, the Middle East, and Asia to fill those jobs. Ownership of consumer goods will expand. People will own cars. Europe will never be enamored with the cars as much as the United States, simply because of their limited resources. Certainly during this time period after World War II, the United States will go through a civil rights movement, 1950s, 1960s, 70s, where African Americans are seeking more rights within society. The Green Movement was something that happened during the 1970s. This was people believing that we needed to take care of the earth better, and so they're being more environmentally conscious. So if the Green Movement comes up on the test, you'll know what they're talking about. Western nations saw economic recessions in the 1970s, and some experienced political change. Here's a picture of Martin Luther King leading the civil rights movement in the United States from the 1950s through 1968 when he was assassinated. This shows a woman, Rosa Parks, who was booked for not giving up her seat on a bus in Alabama, Montgomery, Alabama, and then they boycotted it. Eventually, African Americans will not have to sit in the back of the bus. This sunflower represented the Green Movement within Europe, Earth First. In 1957 to 1958, the foundation of the common market will be established. They will call it the European Union. By 2001, they will have a single currency. The euro is going to be established, and there'll be other countries that come on board that belong to this European Union or the common market. The European Union, 1957, and then other countries joining up. The United States, Canada, and Australia and New Zealand are how do they fare after the Cold War? Canadians pretty much integrated their economy with the United States. There are some problems in Canada, particularly between the French-speaking Canadians and the English-speaking Canadians. There was a movement, and still is to a certain extent in Quebec, to have an independent country that speaks French. Uh, Canada is bilingual at this point. Australia and New Zealand, although cooperative with the United States, by the 1980s has sort of moved on their own, establishing their own markets in Asia, and trading with the likes of Japan, the Philippines, China, and other nations in that region. The United States becomes the leading defender of democracy and the capitalistic values. Um, the United States will enter a period in the 50s of intense concern for communist conspiracies, domestically and abroad, and we will do things to try to contain the communist. And sometimes that means bringing down governments that have been freely elected. One of the problems that is going to occur in 1951 is the Korean War. The North Koreans are going to launch an attack on South Korea. The UN votes to protect South Korea. United States takes the forefront here. They will supply about 80% of the troops. They will be in command of the troops in South Korea. This conflict will last for about 3 years, and it'll eventually end up in a ceasefire. And those folks who live in Japan and South Korea, and the military present there is primarily to resist the North Koreans if they do invade South Korea. Kim Il-sung was the leader of the North Koreans, and Ri being the leader of the South. Truman called this war a police action. And again, the hostilities still continue between these two nations. Many believed in what they call the domino theory. That is, if one country failed the communists, that all of Southeast Asia would fall to the communists. And so this is going to be the thinking that the Americans have in terms of defending places like South Korea and South Vietnam. Here's a picture shows of Americans fighting the communists in North Korea. One of the things that happens, the South Koreans and the Americans and the UN forces will eventually drive the North Koreans back, but then the Chinese will send hundreds of thousands of troops across the border, and eventually this war will end in a stalemate. Incheon, it was a place where MacArthur launched a surprise attack to regain the initiative in Korea. And we're going to stop right here and we'll pick this up